Good morning. Well, I say good morning, but honestly, after what I'm about to tell you, you might want to take a nap yourself. And that's actually perfect, because today we're talking about something that would have sounded absolutely crazy to most bosses just a few years ago. We're talking about Japanese companies that are actually paying their employees to sleep on the job. Now, I know what you're thinking. Wait, what? Companies are paying people to sleep? Yes, you heard that right. And before you start updating your resume to apply for jobs in Japan, let me explain what's really going on here and why it's actually a pretty smart business strategy. So let's start with the basics. In Japan, there's this concept called inamuri. Now, inamuri literally means sleeping while present, and it's been part of Japanese culture for a long time. Traditionally, it was considered acceptable to take short naps in public places like trains, or even during meetings, as long as you were still technically present and available if needed. The idea was that if you were so exhausted that you needed to nap, it must be because you were working incredibly hard. But what's happening now is different. We're not just talking about people nodding off during boring meetings. We're talking about companies that are actively encouraging their employees to take naps, setting up special nap rooms, and even tracking how much their employees sleep to make sure they're getting enough rest. Let me tell you about one company that really caught my attention. There's a tech company in Tokyo that installed what they call nap pods in their office. These are basically fancy reclining chairs in quiet, dimly lit rooms where employees can go for a 20-minute power nap. And here's the kicker. Employees who use these nap pods regularly actually get bonuses on their paychecks. The company tracks how often people use the nap rooms, and if you nap at least twice a week, you get extra money. Now, you might be wondering, why would a company want to pay people to sleep? Well, it turns out there's some solid science behind this. Research shows that short naps, especially in the early afternoon, can significantly improve alertness, creativity, and productivity. A 20-minute nap can boost your performance for the rest of the day in ways that coffee simply can't match. But there's more to this story than just the science of napping. This trend is actually part of a much bigger shift in how Japanese companies think about work and productivity. And to understand why this is such a big deal, you need to know a bit about traditional Japanese work culture. For decades, Japan has been famous for its intense work culture. There's even a word, karoshi, which literally means death from overwork. Japanese employees have traditionally worked extremely long hours, often staying at the office late into the night, sometimes even sleeping at their desks rather than going home. This culture of overwork became so extreme that it started causing serious health problems and even deaths. In recent years, there's been a growing awareness that this approach to work isn't sustainable. Young Japanese workers are increasingly rejecting the idea that they should sacrifice their health and personal lives for their jobs. Companies are starting to realize that exhausted, burned-out employees aren't actually more productive than well-rested ones. So when you see companies paying employees to take naps, it's not just about the immediate benefits of a quick rest. It's a symbol of a fundamental shift in thinking about what makes employees productive and valuable. Let me give you another example that really shows how dramatic this shift has been. There's a major Japanese corporation that used to pride itself on how many hours its employees worked. Managers would brag about team members who stayed until midnight every day. But a few years ago, this same company started installing sensors in their offices that automatically turn off the lights and air conditioning at 6 p.m. to force people to go home. They also started giving bonuses to employees who took all of their vacation days. And guess what happened? Productivity actually went up. When people were working fewer hours but were better rested, they got more done in less time. The quality of their work improved. They made fewer mistakes. And perhaps most importantly, they were happier and more creative. This is where the NAP programs come in. Companies realize that if well-rested employees are more productive, then helping employees get better rest during the day makes perfect business sense. It's not just about being nice to employees. It's about getting better results. Now, let's talk about how these NAP programs actually work because they're more sophisticated than you might think. Most companies that have implemented these programs have done a lot of research to figure out the optimal way to do it. For example, they've learned that the timing of naps is crucial. The best time for a workplace nap is usually between 1 p.m. and 3 p.m., when most people naturally feel a dip in their energy levels. This is actually a biological thing that happens to almost everyone, regardless of whether they had a big lunch or not. They've also figured out that the length of the nap matters a lot. A 20-minute nap is usually ideal because it allows you to get some rest without going into deep sleep. If you nap for too long, you might wake up feeling groggy and disoriented, which defeats the whole purpose. The environment for napping is important too. These companies have created special spaces that are quiet, dark, and comfortable. Some have invested in special chairs that are designed specifically for napping. Others have created small rooms with soft lighting and even gentle background sounds like white noise or nature sounds. But here's what I find most interesting about these programs. They're not just about the physical act of sleeping. They're about changing the entire culture around rest and productivity. In traditional Japanese work culture, looking tired or admitting that you needed rest was often seen as a sign of weakness or laziness. But these companies are actively encouraging employees to prioritize their rest and recovery. Some companies have even started tracking their employees' sleep patterns at home, not to spy on them, but to help them develop better sleep habits. They use apps and devices that monitor sleep quality, and they provide coaching and resources to help employees improve their sleep hygiene. One company I heard about actually gives employees rewards for getting a good night's sleep at home. If the app shows that you got at least 7 hours of quality sleep, you get points that can be redeemed for prizes or extra time off. It's like a fitness program, but for sleep. Now, you might be wondering whether this approach actually works. Well, the results have been pretty impressive. Companies that have implemented these programs report significant improvements in employee productivity, creativity, and job satisfaction. They also see reductions in sick days and employee turnover. But perhaps more importantly, these programs are helping to address some of the serious mental health issues that have been associated with Japan's intense work culture. By encouraging rest and recovery, companies are helping to prevent burnout and reduce stress-related health problems. There's also an interesting generational aspect to this trend. Younger Japanese workers, particularly those in their 20s and 30s, are much more open to these kinds of programs than older workers. They're more likely to use nap rooms, take advantage of flexible work arrangements, and prioritize work-life balance. This generational shift is forcing companies to adapt. If they want to attract and retain young talent, they need to offer work environments that support employee well-being, not just high productivity. But it's not just happening in Japan. Companies around the world are starting to pay attention to what's happening there and implementing similar programs. I've heard about companies in Silicon Valley that have installed nap pods, European companies that encourage afternoon rest breaks, and even some traditional corporations that are experimenting with more flexible approaches to work schedules. The interesting thing is that this trend is challenging some very deep-seated assumptions about work and productivity. For generations, the prevailing wisdom was that more hours worked equals more productivity. But what these companies are discovering is that this isn't necessarily true. In fact, research for various countries shows that there's often an inverse relationship between hours worked and productivity per hour. Countries like Germany and Denmark, where people work fewer hours than in many other developed countries, often have higher productivity rates per hour worked. This is leading to a fundamental rethinking of what it means to be productive at work. Instead of measuring success by how many hours someone spends at their desk, companies are starting to focus more on results and outcomes. And this is where the NAP programs fit into a bigger picture. They're part of a movement toward what some people call human-centered work design. This approach recognizes that employees are not machines that can run continuously without maintenance. They're human beings with natural rhythms and needs for rest and recovery. Let me tell you about one more example that really illustrates this shift. There's a Japanese advertising agency that used to be notorious for its demanding work culture. Employees regularly worked 80-hour weeks, and burnout was common. But a few years ago, new management decided to completely overhaul their approach. They introduced flexible work hours, mandatory vacation time, and yes, nap rooms. But they also did something even more radical. They started measuring success not by how many hours people worked, but by the quality and creativity of their output. They hired more staff so that no individual had to work excessive hours, and they invested in better tools and training to help people work more efficiently. The results were dramatic. Not only did employee satisfaction improve, but the quality of their work got better too. They started winning more awards for creativity, and their clients reported higher satisfaction with their services. Revenue actually increased, even though people were working fewer hours. This story illustrates something important about the NAP programs and the broader shift in work culture. It's not just about being nice to employees, although that's certainly part of it. It's about recognizing that well-rested, healthy, happy employees are actually more valuable to the company than exhausted, stressed out ones. Now, I should mention that this trend isn't without its critics. Some people argue that paying employees to nap is a waste of money, or that it sends the wrong message about work ethic. There are also concerns about how to ensure that these programs are fair and don't create resentment among employees who don't use them. But the companies that have implemented these programs seem to be seeing real benefits. And the trend appears to be spreading, not just in Japan, but in other countries as well. So what does all of this tell us about the future of work? Well, I think it suggests that we're moving toward a more nuanced understanding of productivity and performance. Instead of assuming that more is always better, companies are starting to recognize that there's an optimal balance between work and rest that maximizes both employee well-being and business results. This shift is also being driven by changes in the nature of work itself. As more jobs become knowledge-based rather than purely physical, the quality of thinking becomes more important than the quantity of hours worked. And research consistently shows that tired brains don't think as well as rested ones. There's also a growing recognition that employee well-being is not just a nice-to-have perk, but a business necessity. Companies that don't take care of their employees' physical and mental health are likely to face higher turnover, lower productivity, and potentially serious legal and reputational risks. The NAP programs in Japan are just one example of how companies are adapting to these realities. But they're a particularly interesting example because they represent such a dramatic departure from traditional thinking about work and productivity. Think about it. Just a generation ago, the idea of a company paying employees to sleep would have seemed absurd. But now, it's being recognized as a legitimate business strategy based on solid research and real results. This makes me wonder what other assumptions about work and productivity might be challenged in the coming years. Will we see more companies experimenting with shorter work weeks? More flexible scheduling? More emphasis on results rather than hours worked? I think the answer is probably yes to all of these questions. The pandemic has already accelerated many of these trends, as companies have been forced to experiment with remote work and flexible arrangements. And the results have often been positive, with many employees reporting higher productivity and job satisfaction when they have more control over how, when, and where they work. So the next time you feel that afternoon energy dip and find yourself wishing you could take a quick nap, remember that you might not be lazy. You might just be responding to natural biological rhythms that smart companies are starting to accommodate. And who knows? Maybe your employer will be the next to install nap pods and start paying people to get the rest they need to do their best work. The story of Japanese companies paying employees to nap is really a story about recognizing and respecting human nature in the workplace. It's about understanding that taking care of employees isn't just the right thing to do morally, but it's also the smart thing to do from a business perspective. And that's a lesson that I think applies far beyond just the question of workplace napping. It's about creating work environments that support human flourishing, not just maximum output. It's about recognizing that sustainable productivity requires balance, not just intensity. Next time, we're going to explore another fascinating workplace trend that's challenging traditional thinking. We'll talk about why some companies are starting to hire people specifically for their ability to make mistakes, and what this tells us about innovation and learning in the modern workplace. It's another story about how doing things differently can sometimes lead to better results, even when it goes against conventional wisdom.